learners, how are we doing today? Excellent. We're going to go to Daniel 6.
Sorry, Jess.
So we've had an opportunity so far to look at the prayer life of Daniel, look at some humility, what prayer is in general, and looking at the prayer lives of certain people. And that's kind of a bit of a theme to help look at the prayer life of Daniel. Now, for those of you that don't know or haven't hit that part in the Old Testament yet, because I know going through Leviticus can be a little rough, but Daniel, he was born in Judah. He was part of the Babylonian captivity. So when Nebuchadnezzar came, steamrolled over Judah and integrated them, the best and the brightest were taken back to Babylon in order to serve. And Daniel was one of those people. And he served as a bureaucrat in the Babylonian government eventually, and was educated to serve Nebuchadnezzar. But we do see something that talks a little bit about Daniel's prayer life. So in Daniel 6, verse 10, when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open towards Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. I'm also reading from the English Standard, so if you're trying to read and notice that something's a little different, that's why. But what we see is Daniel prayed 3 times a day, praising God. That's it. Pray 3 times a day. Go and do likewise. Thank you. Now, we might be wondering, okay, why did Daniel choose to pray 3 times a day? So we're going to go to Daniel 1. Now, Daniel was born in the kingdom of Judah. Judah had an off-again, on-again relationship with God.
It's complicated.
Yeah, it's a little bit. Yeah. Relationship status with Judah, it's complicated. But he would have been educated or had the ability to know the law, to know the one true God, the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that he would have had experience with all this, to know God, know his law, and we see that this is something that helps Daniel to build a foundation for his life. So in Daniel 1, first one, we got to recap. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, into his hands, and some of the vessels of the house of God. He brought them into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Then the king commanded his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance and skillful in wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, and learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. So we learned something else about Daniel. He's either part of the royal family or part of the nobility of Judah. And they were to be brought and basically have a 3-year intensive education program that they're brought to a new land where they're going to be taught new language, literature, all the philosophies of them, in order to help them to be able to work in the new government. And the king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate and of the wine that he drank. And they were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Ananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar, Ananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego. So we have this group of people that they were to be well fed. They were supposed to eat the food that the king ate, which he's probably getting the best mutton, some nice wine, all that good stuff. Now, he's with these 4. They're with a group of people. It's not just these 4. That they are brought with a group of people of their kin. It doesn't specify the numbers. It's anywhere between like 2, maybe up to 20 or so. That there were a group of people from Judah that were all to be educated, and then they were to be tested by the king and his advisors to determine, all right, what positions would you go to? What would be the best for this person based off that? But what's important, these 4 were among their brethren. But in verse 8, we start to see something different about these 4. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. All right, so wondering, why doesn't he like the food? Well, it was customary for a lot of cultures at that time, that especially for the food for the royalty, that it was to be offered as a sacrifice to their gods. And God's really clear in the Old Testament law, do not eat food sacrificed to other gods. God finds that very disrespectful and is not a fan of it. Well, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego don't want to defile themselves. Even though they're in Babylon, they have been taken to a far-off land that is far away from their home. They want to still choose to honor their God and practice the law of their God. So therefore, Daniel asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him to not defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sights of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned you your food and your drink. For why should he see that you were in worse condition than the youths who are your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king? All right, so Daniel is approaching one of the leaders that he has to learn from. He says, we don't want to eat the king's food. We've got our reasons. Can we do something else? And you've got the eunuch going like, you're going to get me in trouble. Because if you look all skeletory when this is all said and done, the king's going to wonder what's going on, and then the person in charge is going to get in trouble. And then Daniel, verse 11, and Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had signed, over Daniel, Ananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in this manner and tested them for 10 days. Now, something interesting we're seeing about Daniel was able to approach the leader of this school and ask for something special. And God worked in the situation so that Daniel would find favor in this man's eyes. But it wasn't because, Daniel was going to be doing a lot, everything there down the road special, but Daniel chose in his heart first to honor the law of his God. And then God worked with the situation to allow him to be able to do that. And verse 15, at the end of the 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate of the king's food. So the steward took away their food and wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. So Daniel also did something clever. He didn't walk up and go, this is my way or the highway, we're going to do this. Like, no. He respectfully asked those that were in power above him and offered a compromise. Can we test it? We're going to do just a little test, 10 days. You get to be the ultimate judge when it's all said and done. And if the guy had said, no, you're going to eat the king's food, they may have gone along with that. But they were willing to offer a compromise to test, and God worked in the situation to really bless these 4 people because their hearts were set towards him first. And then, at verse 17, as for those 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time when the king had commanded that they should be brought to the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all those, none was found like Daniel, Ananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king, and in every manner of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired them. Now remember, this school was about teaching them the ways of this foreign land, the language of this foreign land, and those philosophies. The king wasn't questioning them about Old Testament law. He was asking about what's important to their kingdom. And he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were all in his kingdom. These 4 immigrants who learned the language 3 years ago were found to be 10 times wiser than the people that have been working there the entire time. And Daniel, we'll get to that in a second. So we start to see a foundation with Daniel that their faithfulness to God. They chose this first. It doesn't say anything that God said, I want you to eat vegetables. They chose this in their hearts first. And then God worked to bless them and help them with knowledge. If you got your little ribbon, you want to put that in Daniel because we're going to bounce around a little bit, but keep coming back. But we're going to go to Proverbs 1. Now, would Daniel have had access to the writings of the prophets and the law until this time?
Yes.
Yeah, everything up to Daniel, really. But, so, they've had examples of Moses. They've had examples of David, of Abraham. These great people in their tribe, their family, their people, and the relationships that God had with them. But they also would have had all the writings in the law to build their lives off of first. And if we look, these four were said to be found incredibly wise what they do. Proverbs 1 verse 7, the fear or the reverence of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, or the beginning of wisdom. And the fools despise knowledge and instruction. They would have known that reverencing God first is the foundation of everything for wisdom. And if we look at Proverbs 2, in verse 6, for the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield for those who walk in integrity, guarding the path of justice and watching over the way of his saints. And you will understand righteousness and justice and equity and every good path. For wisdom will come into your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. They would have known these. And it says God gave them knowledge, wisdom, and understanding in a foreign language, in other philosophies that were not of God. But God gave them that because they had their hearts set first. You're in college, or in high school, you're having trouble learning something, you can go to God with it. Keeping that honor and reverence towards God first, God can bless us with knowledge and wisdom beyond what's here when it's needed. Now we go back to Daniel. All right, so they get appointed into some positions, and they're like mid-level bureaucrats now. That in the second, so Daniel 2, verse 1, the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. And the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dream. So they came in and stood before the king. And the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know that dream. And the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we'll show you the interpretation. And the king answered to the Chaldeans, the word from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and the interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your house shall be laid in ruins. Right. So there it's like, okay, just tell us the dream and we'll tell you what it means. Nah, you're the wise one. You tell me the dream and the interpretation, or we're going to dismember you and burn your house down. Well, you've got a group of people that are like, we're in trouble. So there's some banter between them going on, talking like, well, you got to tell us the dream. It's like, no, I don't. You are the wise person. And this goes on for a little bit. Then the king gets mad and says, like, all right, kill them all. Well, when we get to our mid-level bureaucrats of Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel, we've got in verse 12, so Daniel 2, verse 12, because this king was angry and very furious and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed, so the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed. And they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He declared to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree of the king so urgent? And Arioch made the matter known to Daniel. And Daniel went in to request the king to appoint him a time that he might show the interpretation of the dream. So we flashed later in years. We don't know how long, but they've been working. And they had this mindset during their training. And we kind of can look at, okay, did they continue to keep that up? Or after they got what they needed from God, did they go about their own ways? Well, you still got these companions. They're still all together. They're still friends. And so the guy's coming along, finding the wise men, killing them, that shows up to Daniel, and Daniel's like, question first. What's going on? Why is the king so pissed? But Daniel had enough respect from the captain of the guard that he would be able to have a conversation, and the guard just kind of held off his orders for a moment and explained the situation. And it wasn't until last night that, and I've read Daniel a lot, that something stands out. You've got after Daniel finds out what's going on, he asks to have an appointment with the king to be able to tell the interpretation. Now, is anything said about him praying to God about this? Or God already telling him the answer to the problem? No. He's saying, please make an appointment with the king. So this is an example of Daniel's believing that, all right, this is a bad situation, and him and his friends are about to be killed. But he's saying, I'm going to trust my God. Set this appointment, and my God will provide something. He's saying to himself, my God will help us in this situation, and we'll act on it from there. He's acting on his believing before coming to that petition to God and getting that which he needs. And in Daniel 2, verse 17, we see how they handle the situation. Then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to Ananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions. Now remember, there's a lot of people from the Babylonian captivity, and they went to school with a bunch of other people. After they graduated, these are the four that kept talking to each other, because they were the four that built that strong relationship with each other based off of the God. And Daniel told them to seek mercy from God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. And Daniel blessed the God of heaven. And Daniel said, he answered, said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for whom belongs wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise. For you have given me wisdom and might, and have made known to me what we asked of you. For you have made known unto us the king's matter. So they are together, or in prayer circle, asking God for help, the knowledge and wisdom they need to handle the situation so they're not destroyed. God provides it. What does Daniel immediately do? Thanks and praises God for this. And he's able to go before the king, provide the interpretation. The king is ecstatic, stops killing people, and promotes Daniel up. We don't know of any other people that might have been in a situation where they had to interpret dreams and the king was so impressed that they promoted him to a really high position in the government? Would Daniel have known of this story?
Yeah.
Joseph was in a foreign land away from his people, but his God was still with him. And Daniel got promoted, and what did he do? He brought his 3 friends with him. That if you're going to be running a lot of things, you want people to work for you that you can trust. And rather trust some people with the Spirit of God on them as opposed to some general yahoos.
Yeah.
So we see, this is Daniel's life. He's been promoted. Now we got some things with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We've got some king replacements. Now think about Daniel. When you look at the time that he's been serving, it says he started in Nebuchadnezzar up to the first year of King Cyrus. That is 4 different kingly administrations, sometimes under like 1, 2, or 3 different types of kingdoms. It would be like the governor of a colony after the British take over. He's still in power when America's ruling, and let's say for the sake of this analogy, the South won the Civil War. And they keep this person kind of sitting there in that position. It's kind of that weird. But when we look at the time span, it's about 60 years. For those of you history people, 60 years ago, our president was Dwight D. Eisenhower. You don't hear of many people lasting more than 4 or 8 years in any political term. But Daniel was serving at a high level and working in this kingdom for over 60 years. That's about the span of time that he faced, especially with some different kingdoms. Now he rises up, and we've got some people replacing. What's special, when other people come in and replace, they find that Daniel's a fantastic guy, good at his job, they keep him around. Well, it starts to make some other people jealous. I'm going to take a look in Daniel 6. Then we get King Darius. It pleased King Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes or governors to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was one. So Daniel is like fourth in command of this nation. And later he actually gets promoted up, so he's like the chief of the presidents. He's found a lot of favor in the eyes of King Darius. And then verse 3, and then as Daniel became distinguished above all other presidents and princes because of the excellent spirit that was with him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. And the presidents and the princes sought to find a ground to complaint against Daniel, which regarded to the kingdom, but they could find no ground or complaint or anything of fault. All his dots were T'd and her I's were crossed. All that, it was perfect. That all the work he did, he wasn't taking bribes, he didn't have this nice pool or a giant money bin of dirty money that he swam in. Daniel was a fine, upright guy. They couldn't find any fault with him. And then they go, well, and the second half of verse 4, they find no ground of complaint or fault because he was faithful, no error was found in him. Verse 5, then these men said, we shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it concerning the law of his God. So Daniel's much older now. He is still keeping the law of his God. And they know that the only way they're going to be able to basically put the screws to him is they need to make him have a choice between does he honor his God or does he honor the law of the land. So they come up with this idea, they get the king to sign it, and says like, all right, if anyone makes any petition to any god or anything except you, king, it should be thrown into a den alliance. And Darius is sitting back like, yeah, I could like this, yes, we'll do this, yes, we'll sign it into law. But he has no idea that these 120 people are conspiring against his favorite person. And then we go to the verse where we started, verse 10, when Daniel knew that the document had been signed. So he knew what the law is now. That if he were to pray to his God, he would be breaking the law and should be thrown into the den alliance. He went to his house, and in the window in the upper chambers and towards Jerusalem, he got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before their God. So they got him. They go to the king. Oh, king, you remember that law you signed the other day? Yeah, we found someone breaking it. Daniel. And, well, Darius starts to get in a bit of a rough position at this point. And if you turn to verse 14, so after these people come and say, this Daniel, the guy, high person in charge, should be keeping your laws because he's part of the government, he broke them. Verse 14, then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel. Now there's some kings, some people in power that don't necessarily care about the underlings that work for them. But you've got this king that goes, oh no. And he works diligently to try to find a solution to save Daniel. He must be a really good employee. And when he finds that there's no way to do that, then verse 11, no, lies. All right, so when he finds that there was no way to do that, we got verse 16. And the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast in the den alliance. The king declared to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you. And the stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. He stayed up all night worrying about Daniel. And the instant that he could act, he went there the next day, opened up the stone, and asked Daniel. And at daybreak of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den alliance. And he came near the den where Daniel was, and he cried out his tone of anguish. And the king declared to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? And Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God has sent his angel to shut the lion's mouth, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him, and also before you, O king. I have done no harm. So Daniel was not harmed because he trusted his God. Now Daniel going into this situation probably had a couple things going through his head. One, this night could end badly. Well, if that's the case, he dies. The next thing he sees is God at the resurrection. Or is God's going to deliver him out of this? He was okay with either one of those decisions. So like, all right, I'm either going to be in paradise with my God, because he believed in the resurrection and believed that the Messiah was going to come and accomplish his works and everything, or God was going to deliver him out of this. How many of us are in that situation pretty much with everything? We either, okay, that ends badly, but then the next thing we know, we see Christ. Or God's going to deliver us, or now for us, Christ comes back before there's any problem. One of those three things could happen with any situation that we face. And Daniel wasn't harmed because of his trust in God. Now, he may have been able to flash back, thinking about that verse in Jeremiah, about I know the plans for you, says the Lord, plans for a hope and a future, that this might have been something that was comforting him while he's sitting in there. But when you look at the believing of Daniel, does this seem like a spur of the moment, I need to believe because I'm in trouble kind of thing? Or is this like a foundation that has been his entire life? Well, how many of us can get to that position? Remember, Daniel is a servant. We are sons and daughters of God. Is God going to do less for his children than he would for an employee? Probably not. But he still chooses to honor his God, that it's built off of a life of prayer and a life of trust. Well, when you think about Daniel and how good he was, especially spanning all those different situations, he prayed 3 times a day. Do you think it was constantly about just praying for his people and that things were good?
No, it was praise to God.
Praise to God as well. He also probably brought his problems about working in this pagan government to God often. How do you be that good in such a potentially evil, spiritually evil place, but still be great with the help of God? Praying 3 times a day, probably bringing up a lot of these business matters. How do we handle this? So, can we come to God for situations like this? Yeah. We go to James 1. So Daniel, from the start to the end of his life, built a strong relationship trusting God. And it helped him to prosper. Him and his friends gained knowledge and wisdom to surpass all the other people that they were with, even their own brothers, to surpass all those people. And then they got promoted higher and higher into these positions of government because they were great at their work. And they were essentially working for their God. They weren't necessarily working for the king. And they would come to God seeking wisdom when they need it. James 1:5. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, without all reproach, and it will be given. But let him ask in faith and not doubting. For one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. And it was read yesterday, if you go to Philippians 4:6. So God says we can come to him seeking wisdom. Well, is there more than just wisdom that we're able to come to for God? Yes, there is. That's Colossians. In Philippians 4 verse 6, do not be anxious about anything. When you're sitting in a den of lions trying to decide if you should put on like a one-man show of the Lion King or something, don't be anxious about anything. But in everything with prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. We saw that when the king was having the bad dream. They came with prayer and supplication and were very thankful for the God that they had. Let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. So we can look at the life of Daniel as one where he was in some dark situations, definitely surrounded by a bunch of dark people that were very jealous for what he did and who he was. But he was able to call on the knowledge of his God, the word that he had, in order to stand faithful with them, and that same God helped him to prosper. You are sons and daughters of God, and there is no reason you cannot have that same relationship and more. Thank you very much.